I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. So welcome Alpha Shulty to Parent Like a Psychologist. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Leanne. I'm excited to be here as well.
I've just realised, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Oh, it's all right. I've had foreign last names my whole life, but in
Okay.
German it's Schulte, but we just
Okay.
pronounce
Yeah.
the vowels differently, but seriously, it's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
it's fine.
So I'm really excited to have this discussion with you today because you, I would say, are a money expert, and um, I think it's really. We were talking just before we started recording about how you help people in business a lot, but I think often running a family is almost like running a little business. So I think there's going to be a lot of crossovers and just gold information for parents today. But can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and what you do and how you got there?
Sure. Yes, it's a bit of a windy journey, but I'll keep it brief. So I actually started out as in my professional career as a corporate tax accountant. I was always good with numbers, but I've discovered I didn't really enjoy that work as such. I
Mm,
really enjoyed working with clients and the people aspect, but the compliance side just became a bit mundane after a while. So I left that and actually went into management consulting because it was very much about, problem solving, helping people integrate and making sure all of that. So I did that for a number of years. And then I started on my own personal financial journey because I thought, oh, I should know this. I've studied accounting. Yeah. And then I realized personal finance is actually quite different. So I got a financial planner and realized that after a little while, he was just a salesperson
mm,
and wasn't kind of helping me actually understand what I was doing. So I studied financial planning because
okay.
I'm a bit of a learning geek because I love to find things out, and I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want the curated version. I just want all of it, and then I'll discern from it what I want. So,
Yeah.
and then doing that, I realized A, how much I didn't know, and we aren't taught, and B, how that sort of financial planning situation just wasn't for me.
Yeah, sure.
So I then started to actually help friends because they watched me on my journey and they're like, "Oh, how did you do that? What are you doing? How did?"
Mm,
And I decided that I actually wanted to help people understand money, which was the step sort of before people got to financial planners because there's so much we aren't taught. And then in
yeah.
that journey, I discovered, and then having my daughter in all of that as well, and then I recognized I didn't get taught about it. So how do I teach her about it?
Mm,
And how do I watch my languaging? How do I demonstrate the right behavior? Because let's face it, we're not all perfect.
yeah.
And yes, we can go a little overboard at Christmas and birthdays sometimes, and the messaging gets a bit mixed too. So how do we deal with that? So that's sort of how I ended up. And then in the business space, because all the clients that were coming to work with me were business owners.
Right.
So I was like, there's a pattern happening here. So, and because I had that corporate background, it was quite a natural kind of connection for me to help them with their business finances, but also then how they pull that into their personal finances.
Mm,
Because we've got professionals like the accountants and bookkeepers who help us with the professional business compliance side, but then how do you manage your money day to day?
mm.
And you might even have an accountant to help you with your personal tax return, but they're not going to help you understand money and how to manage it and how to then grow wealth out of it too. So that's sort of how that thread kind of came through into what I do today.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and I always find it interesting or that there are some common things in people's stories about how they end up doing what they're doing. And it's usually it evolves along the way, like you've mentioned, rather than setting out to do one particular thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's life is a journey and you just kind of have to go with it as well.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, the more you like push for something, the less it's likely to happen. You kind of
Hmm.
sit back and go with the flow to a certain extent. You still have to take action. The easier it becomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And it's It's nice to think about it that way, trying to follow things that are easy and feel effortless and good, and then things will come to you from that.
Yeah, and it's a gut following thing too, I
Yeah.
find as
Yep.
well, which, yeah, intuition's a big part of what I do.
Interesting. And that could be the link that leads on to the next point, because we were talking before about how lots of our stories about money come right back from childhood. And then it's interesting to think about with money, is that what intuition's kind of about, following the gut feeling that you have. And
Yeah.
so it's maybe tuning into listening to that. But there's two questions, I guess, there. The first one is, how do our money stories and what we think about money and how we handle it, where do they come from?
So there's sort of two aspects, and this links to, we were having a conversation the other day about nature versus nurture.
Mm,
And some of it is direct learning, the things that we personally experience or we at least observe firsthand. Then there's the stories, and there's some generational stuff I think that comes with that. And there are some gender biases and some cultural biases that go with this as well. So I
mm,
think it's very much, it comes in two different directions, and it's hard to then go, okay, so what is my story? Because as children, very much things are, life is kind of always done to us in a way.
yeah,
Things are, we can't always do what we want to do, even though we don't necessarily know what we want to do. Like, but we're part of a family, and our
yeah,
parents sort of dictate our lives for a fair chunk of those early days when we're forming who we are and what our identity is, and our money stories as part of that. So
yeah,
what we end up taking on into our 20s is not our story, it's someone else's story
right.
that's kind of come onto us that we haven't recognized. We've got a little bit of our own experiences in there, because let's face it, we don't really have a whole lot of money until we get into our 20s
But
of our
yeah,
of our own.
yeah,
So and that's what makes it so complex. And that lack of awareness and being kind of having the space created for us to figure that out, whether who we are as human beings, and then what who we are with money. And then
mm,
there's personalities, there's cultures, there's genders, there's society, there's TikTok. Like, oh my God,
yeah,
the amount of influencers that I see on social media, it's like, holy moly, it's so difficult for people to figure things out now, because
yeah,
there's just random information everywhere.
yep. I find that in terms of parenting, which is what I help people with, not so much their parenting, but how to adapt it for kids,
Yeah.
who develop differently. But definitely that idea of so much information out there.
Mm,
And you mentioned that you're a person who likes to seek out and learn it all and filter it through, which is an awesome way to be, but not everybody's like that too. So it can be really confusing to know where to go and what to listen to.
yes.
But it also sounds like sometimes our own ideas too, it can be confusing to think where they came from because of all of those influences.
Yeah. And I think there's that idea, especially as parents, that we have to have it all figured out before we
Mm,
can help or teach our kids, whether
yeah.
that be about money or pretty much anything else. And to a certain extent, like for instance, I only learned to ride a bicycle in my 30s, whereas my husband is very natural. So he was the one who taught my daughter to ride a bike.
Mm,
There's other things, like I learned piano as a child, and my daughter's now starting to learn, whereas my husband didn't. So I'm helping her with her lessons and her finger placement and all of that when she's learning piano. So there's some things that you do actually have to have some knowledge of before you can impart that knowledge.
yeah.
But when it comes to being a human or parenting or teaching things about money, where there's so many other aspects to it, there is knowledge there too. But ultimately, I don't think we need to have it all figured out. We don't have to be experts to teach our kids about money. And I think it's an awareness very much to start with, and
Mm,
also acknowledging that it's a journey, and also being open with our kids. Like with my daughter as well, I'm very open about the fact that I'm not perfect and that I don't always react or respond in a way that I'm happy with.
don't
And
you?
then Yes, I know. We were having that conversation the other day as well. And I was like, oh my goodness. So, but being open with them and just saying, we're going to, we are going to talk about it. And it also depends on your child. Like my daughter, I don't know if it's just because of the environment she's grown up in, but I actually think she has like a natural kind of thing with money, in that she likes money. She wants to she likes to earn it. She doesn't mind talking about it. She, is proud of when she does something to earn it, like when she was selling her necklaces at the markets, or if she
Mm.
helps me with something that actually really adds value and she gets money for it. But I have to really acknowledge that and make her recognize that that is really, really good. It's not just pocket money that she's getting for, putting her dishes away and making her bed.
Yeah.
That's fine, but this is like earning it is something else
Yes.
entirely, and we have
Yeah.
to honor and acknowledge that. And I
Yep.
think because we have this desire to, well, we have this fear about talking about money
Mm.
because I don't know, it's not culturally acceptable. As I was saying, I'm reading this book at the moment, Happy Money, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
He's Japanese, and he's like, apparently in Japanese culture, it's quite common for somebody to ask to look at your wallet. I was like,
Right.
oh
Okay.
my gosh, that would just be a total no-no in our culture.
Yeah.
And that was how he started the book. And I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting. So
Yeah.
I think it's just normalizing at least the conversation. You don't have to ask to look at someone's wallet. You don't have to go to that extent, but at least being able to have the conversation in an open way where you feel comfortable and not judged, because we're judging ourselves as well. That's,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. We are judging ourselves anyway. But I think the thing too is that we're teaching our kids anyway as well. So if
yeah,
even if we don't intentionally sit down and tell them what we think or how we make money decisions, they're
yes,
learning it by watching us and making their own story or narrative about it,
yeah,
anyway. So
yes.
yeah, we may as well have the conversation about it.
Yeah, let's control the narrative, or let's at least guide the narrative rather
Yeah.
than them, because it's like gossip. If something isn't clear or communicated, somebody will make it up. And
Mm,
what they make up is usually a lot worse than the reality.
yeah.
So we may as well open that conversational door. And what makes it even more difficult is that in a family environment, and I've seen this quite a lot, the couples have very different ways of seeing and managing money because they've got their own money stories that they haven't really delved into. And
Yeah.
that creates their friction there. So of course what the children see is, oh, money is creating friction with my parents, so I don't like money.
Yes, I was just going to ask about that before because the way you mentioned you teaching about the piano and your husband teaching about the bike made me think, yeah, we both have these experiences of money in a partnership that we're bringing to the family,
Yeah.
that can often be really different. And so we're, in a way, t kids are learning different things from each adult, really. But
Yes.
how do you go about helping couples with that? Getting on the same page or at least aligned with each other.
Yeah. So the first thing is for them to understand their own money history. So
Right.
I actually have a money history kind of thing where I ask some questions for them to just start to delve into what did they hear, what did they see, what did they experience, what did they feel about money. So sort of because children are very sensory, which is why there's so many sensory toys out there at the moment. There's, I mean, even I've got stuff on my desk,
Yeah.
other things that I play with. I even have this little like chakra wheelie thing here, and depending on whether I feel like something soft or something hard. So we're still very sensory. So I think a lot of the time our education system has trained us to just use our visual.
Mm,
But again, we were talking about there's so many different other things. So for a grown up to kind of take themselves back and think of how money appeared for them, because it might not be as obvious as, oh, money doesn't grow on trees, or, I'm not made of money, because you hear all this sort of repartee quite a lot.
yeah.
But it's even down to the, how did they, when it came to birthdays or Christmas, how did that feel? Did you feel your parents were stressed because they had
Yeah.
to try and find all this money? They might
Right.
not have overtly spoken about it, but you felt it. Like
Yeah.
one thing that always sort of stands up back in my mind was when I was younger. I think I was in my sort of like mid-teens, and my mum had gone through a bit of a rough patch financially. And I got home one night and the lights were out. She hadn't
Right.
paid the electricity bill, partly because she had two of them, and because she had a granny, like a separate granny flat, and she had two different power bills, and she'd forgotten to pay one of the bills. And I was like, that's because there was so much overwhelm from so many other things, but it
Mm,
still sticks in my mind. So it's like she didn't have the money to pay the phone bill. Sorry, the electricity bill. Whether
yeah.
she did or didn't, kind of now is almost irrelevant because that's how my mind remembers it.
Yes.
So it's that perception as reality. So going back and helping them understand what their money stories are, and then watching for patterns in their adult life because they'll be there. and
Yeah.
then you can work from there. So it is a bit of sort of self-work to do
Yeah.
that. And it doesn't mean that you have to have it all done before you start to talk to your kids about money. You just have to
Yeah.
be aware.
Yeah. So it's the first step.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because that story you shared gave a sense of how emotions get linked to those things as well, which is
Mm.
why perhaps then it's such a fraught topic and a difficult one for people to talk about,
Yeah.
the money, because kids might feel scared about that stuff. And so, and because with emotions, we remember things a lot more.
Yeah.
So it forms a bigger part of that story. Yeah.
Yes. And
So
we store the energy in our bodies, and that festers unless we deal with it. So
yeah.
yeah, that flow is interrupted because we have some sort of energy there that's blocking it. And I'm
Mm,
like, why? Because I get clients all the time who's like, oh, my husband just can't hang on to money, or
right.
I can't earn beyond a certain amount. Like I keep hitting this ceiling, and it's usually driven by their childhood. Their family never had any money, so in this particular case, the husband was used to not having money. So every time he got paid, the money just got spent. So he didn't
Yeah.
have any because that's what he was familiar with.
Yeah.
And until you become aware of that, it's really difficult to do anything about it.
Yep.
And the only way you can do is the awareness of the actual story that you've taken on, and then the awareness of your current behavior as a result of that story. And until
Yeah.
you interrupt it and start to change your behavior, the story will just keep perpetuating.
Yeah. And if you're fine with that, you're fine with that. But it's the awareness then that brings that to be able to be a choice then
Yes.
about what you want to do now and moving forward.
Yes. They're
Really
conscious.
interesting.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm,
yeah. There's so many
yep.
linkages
Oh,
between psychology
absolutely.
and parenting and psychology and money.
Yeah, because it's all people, isn't it? And yeah.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned intuition before.
Mhm.
How do you see intuition fitting into what we do with our money or how we teach our kids about it?
It's kind of that it's a bit of I see intuition when it comes to money like a filter. So we go to do something or we go to say something, and if we've started to train ourselves to question things or become aware at least of things before they happen, we listen to our intuition for, oh, do I really need to buy that, or do I if I'm about to say something or I've said it and you're like, oh, okay, my intuition is sending off some alarm bells that, oh, maybe that wasn't quite the right, it might be misinterpreted. So I need to like check in with my child to make sure that they took it the way I intended it, not the way they potentially took it. And I don't know unless I talk to them and ask them. So it's listening to that little niggly voice inside, which we quite often suppress because we're busy or we
Yeah,
don't trust ourselves, or someone else tells us it has to be this way. And we're like, well, it doesn't necessarily feel right for me, but they said so,
yeah.
so it must be. And then the more we suppress that, the harder it becomes to listen to it. So that's sort of, it's decisions. For instance, somebody the other day was talking to, they were looking at building a house, and they got about 90% of the way with a builder. And then something
Mm,
in them just said, no, I just don't like this person. They didn't go with them. And 6 months later, they went into liquidation. So they
right.
they would have lost all of their money that
Yeah.
they would have invested. So it's stuff like that. We really need to tap into our intuition when we're making decisions about money, when we talk about it, anything really in life.
Mm,
And this is specifically money related.
yeah. I can see that that would perhaps boost confidence as well if you know that you've made your decision based on your intuition. There's, like we said before, lots of information out there, but if you're using that, it gives you a place to, you know, I guess, a voice to guide you in terms of what's the right thing.
Yeah, and it can be hard because it might go against logic, might go against trends. I,
Mm,
I read once Warren Buffett. He was a big investing kind of fellow. He said he will look at the management team. He'll look at the financials. He'll do like the technical analysis when he's looking at investing in a company. But ultimately, if his gut says no, doesn't matter what any of the other data says, he won't do it. And I remember
yeah.
reading that and just going, wow, if someone like that is trusting their gut, and there's, in
Yeah.
that case, there's often millions of dollars at stake, but we're so trained to the logic says this. And I'm a very logical, like I will constantly be going, oh, but that's not logical.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the balance there of going, okay, am I wanting this because there's an ego aspect that's wanting this, or am I
Yeah.
wanting it because it's truly what I feel is best for me or my family or the situation in general? So it's a difficult one because, like I said, you can disappoint people, or you can also confuse, or other people just won't understand your decisions. But if
Mm.
you trust yourself enough, eventually you'll start to see the results paying off, and then you'll trust yourself more and more.
Yeah. Yep. And so you mentioned a little bit about the energy as well, and that emotion kind of stored that then might cause energy blocks and that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I listened to one of your podcast episodes about that, the energy impact on money. What
Yes.
what work do you do with people to address that?
So there's a number of things. I mean, I one of the things I find really important is that clarity. So
Hmm.
having a very clear idea of what it is that you want. And this is, if you read anything in relation to manifestation, law of attraction, anything about sort of achieving stuff in life, you need to actually know what it is that you want. Be as specific as possible. And if you don't have 100% of the idea first, you incrementally go. So it's about helping people understand what it is that they want, and that also that money it's neutral. It's a
Mm.
tool. We apply all of this emotion to it, but ultimately, and I read, so I was listening to something the other day, which I thought was a really good analogy. They said money is like rain. So the rain can pour on the weeds and the weeds can grow, or the rain can pour on your roses and the roses can grow. And I was like, yeah, so it's neutral. So it's like the rain, it will make whatever grow. So
Yeah.
whether it's, something that is good or bad, or, yeah, whatever it is, it's helping people understand that money itself comes in and comes out. So that's where the energy factor really comes in. Like, we earn money, we spend money. The money we have in the bank, funds, loans that help people buy houses and do things. There's lots of money flowing constantly. Like, if you think of the Matrix and we actually looked at sort of money, it is literally not necessarily just digits, but the whole thing is moving around.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of understanding that we can either be in flow with that, or we can be kind of go up the river rather than with the river.
Yeah.
And that, so it's understanding that, but it's being clear on what you want. Taking breaths, and I know breath work is really, really important, but actually really just grounding yourself in your body and feeling your own energy through your breath,
Hmm.
and starting to, and this is where I combine the kind of more woo woo with the practical, because I find that you can't just sit there and dream and plan. You've got to actually then do something. But then what do you do? And then it's
Yeah.
starting to actually look at it. Looking at your money is actually one of the biggest hurdles people have mentally. And quite
Mm.
often, once they get over that one, they realize it's either not as bad as they thought, or
Right.
perhaps it is as bad as they thought, but at least they now know and they can start to do something about it. So I have a client who spends quite a lot on takeout. They
Okay.
didn't realize how much until they looked at it. They thought they were spending money on clothes. I was like, well, actually, dollar value wise, you're actually spending like this on takeout and about this much on clothes. So, but the clothes spending was what was creating all the friction in the family. But it was the takeout that they were both doing that was causing the most financial impact. So once you
Yeah.
have that, so it's then kind of going, all right, you do all the flow, clarity, breathwork stuff to be able to get you prepared for looking at your finances, and then understanding, because then when you see it, you're like, okay, it's coming in, it's going out, it's coming in, it's going out. You start to understand the flow and that there's energy around that. And then even when you spend money, rather than just going, oh, the bill came in, you're like, oh, well, I spent money and here's the bill, and now I pay it. It's the same with a lot of businesses when they have to pay tax. I was like,
Mm.
that's actually really exciting, because it means you're making money. You're making enough
Yeah.
money to pay tax. Do we like to pay that much tax? Perhaps not. And that's where accountants can hopefully help you minimize that. Excuse me. But it's understanding that it's out, and then you're going to earn more money back in again. And as long as you're happily receiving and somewhat happily paying,
Yeah.
there's at least that positive energy around it. So it's not quite so heavy and mundane. And you're like, oh, I'm going to pay another bill. You're like, well, you you spend money, you pay. That's kind of how
Yeah.
it works. But
Yep.
it's not necessarily as simplistic as that, but it's getting an understanding of that flow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And it reminds me of like just the different way of thinking about it or talking about it. I know a couple who, for example, when they want to talk about their budget, they joke, do you want to fight now or fight later? Because
Mm,
that's kind of how they see it going.
mm,
Versus someone else who was saying every time she gets a bill and pays it, says, and there's plenty more where that came from, as this
yeah.
kind of positive way of managing and dealing with it. So yeah,
Yes.
like you
Yeah, our
said,
language is extremely important around money. And
mm,
I'm one of those like really I literally go through my credit card bill every month because I was like, oh, okay. In a way, I find it actually kind of relaxing because I thought, oh, it's sort of looking back over the last month and checking on, and I have a bit of a feel for how much I normally spend on various things because I tend to budget more by like categories rather than line by line. But I still like to have a
yeah,
look also because, in this day and age, just want to make sure nobody's putting anything on there
yeah,
that shouldn't be there.
yep,
And I find it actually quite like it's an activity I quite enjoy. So
mm,
yes, it is, let's let that money go so more money can come in. And it's understanding that the doors and the windows are open on both sides. So it's not
yeah,
just all about focusing on the out, which is what we all focus on. I see so
yeah,
much about budgeting and spending and even saving to a certain extent. I was
mm,
like, well, yeah, we can save, but what are we saving for? Are we
yeah,
saving to invest? Are we saving because we need to buy a new car and we don't want to have to finance it? Are we saving for a holiday? Are we saving for something fun? Like put a label or put a purpose to it. So it's not just saving. Otherwise, it just feels hard and like you're hoarding. And you're like, okay, I'm like waiting for something to happen so I can spend this money. And sure enough, something will happen and bingo, something breaks and you got to replace it. You're like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. We're trying to get away from the reactionary side of money and make it a little bit more flow in, has a purpose, and is doing something valuable for us and our lives and the world potentially as well.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.